الرحمن الرحيم إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة يقاتلون في سبيل الله فيقتلون ويقتلون وعدا عليه حقا في التوراة والإنجيل والقرآن ومن أوفى بعهده من الله فاستبشروا ببيعكم الذي بايعتم به وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. التائبون العابدون الحامدون السائحون الراكعون الساجدون الآمرون بالمعروف والناهون عن المنكر والحافظون لحدود الله وبشر المؤمنين. ما كان للنبي والذين آمنوا أن يستغفروا للمشركين ولو كانوا أولي قربى من بعد ما تبين لهم أنهم أصحاب الجحيم. وما كان استغفار إبراهيم لأبيه إلا عن موعدة وعدها إياه فلما تبين له أنه عدو لله تبرأ منه إن إبراهيم لأواه حليم. وما كان الله ليضل قوما بعد إذ هداهم حتى يبين لهم ما يتقون إن الله بكل شيء عليم. إن الله له ملك السماوات والأرض يحيي ويميت وما لكم من دون الله من ولي ولا نصير. صدق الله العظيم.
26 juz memorized. MashaAllah. Allahumma barik. Barakallah. Hayyakum Allah. Jazakallah khair. Barakallah fik. Our speaker today is here. Shaykh Muzzammil, inshallah, over there.
Inshallah, today we're going over the 12th juz of the Quran. And subhanAllah, I don't know how it is for you guys, but I think for many of us, the month of Ramadan, it feels like it's just starting. but now that you think about it, you know, a third of it is gone. And we have only the last 2/3 left of this month. So whatever we can take advantage of, you know, the time is to do it now. Again, the month of Ramadan is like a marathon. And in a marathon, it doesn't matter, you know, if you run really, really fast at the beginning, because it doesn't count until you finish. And this is the same for any a'mal that we have as Muslims. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِخَوَاتِمِهَا, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So you can burn yourself out, you can pace yourself. What counts really is how we get to the end. And so the race is continuing, and we have to make sure that we are continuing with it. We're continuing with our connection with the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. We're continuing with staying away from those things which are haram and disliked. Controlling our gaze, controlling our ears, controlling our mouths. All of these things. Doesn't stop right now because this is the second part of Ramadan. You know, it's not like you can just get away with whatever you want after the first week and the last week, outside of these 2 times. No, Allah Azza wa Jal is watching us always. The surah that we have today, the chapters that we're discussing today, they're primarily 2. But I just want to go over one because I'm sure whoever has it tomorrow will discuss the other chapter tomorrow. The second chapter is Surah Yusuf. And this is a beloved surah to all believers. So many powerful lessons in the life of Yusuf alayhi salam. So much to learn from Yusuf alayhi salam and everything that he went through. But the chapter before this is the chapter of Hud alayhi salam. Again, one of the prophets that Allah Azza wa Jal He sent before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in fact, this chapter in the Quran is very, very important for one particular reason, because there's a hadith that speaks about the virtue of this chapter of the Quran. There's a lot of different, you know, virtues of different chapters of the Quran. Most of these virtues that have been narrated are weak or they are completely fabricated. But this virtue that we have of Surah Hud, this is in fact something that a lot of scholars have authenticated. And it's something that really should bring pause to us and make us think. The Prophet ﷺ, it's narrated from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, that he said, شَيَّبَتْنِي هُود وَأَخَوَاتُهَا. شَيَّبَتْنِي هُود. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that Hud, the chapter of Hud, made him go gray, made his hairs turn gray, alayhi salatu wassalam. Brought him old age, in another way of saying. You know, so this surah, it had a strong impact on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This surah had a very strong impact on him. And it then behooves the question, right? It makes us ask, what is in this surah that actually made the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this reaction? And when you go through the surah, there are a couple themes that come up over and over again. One of those themes is that this surah discusses the lives of many of the prophets that came before. Many of the prophets who came before, it discusses their stories, and it discusses what happened to the people of these prophets. Now, many prophets that came, we know that there's a trend. They give da'wah to their people, the people they turn away from this da'wah, they continue, they try until the people start to repel them and kick them out. And then eventually they are commanded by Allah Azza wa Jal to leave once they have delivered the hujjah, once they've delivered the proof to these people. They retreat, they leave the towns with their families. Allah saves them, Allah saves their families or most of their families. And then Allah destroys the rest of the town. And He destroys these towns in numerous different ways. In some cases He destroys them with a flood. In other cases, He destroys them with tornadoes. In some cases, He has hail, rain that falls on them, that is made of stones and destroys them. But there is a trend that exists here, which is what? The Prophet ﷺ, he's being reminded over and over again that look, you have brothers. You have people who shared the same profession as you. You have people who were given the same responsibilities and the same job title as you. But look what happened. In each and every single one of these cases, they were saved, but their people were not. The vast majority of their people were destroyed. Now this doesn't indicate a failure on the part of the message. No, the message is what the message is. Whether people accept or not, this does not reflect success or failure on the part of the Anbiya. No, they've been sent with the message and their responsibility is to deliver this message. So as long as they've delivered this message, they have taken care of their duty. They've taken care of their responsibility. So no one can say that they're failures, right? And this is important for us to remember. Why? Because sometimes we determine success and failure based on those things that you can see in front of you. But the reality is that this is not how truth, this is not how success and failure is determined by Allah Azza wa Jal. If this was how success and failure is determined, then who would be losing in this current conflict that you have between Israel and Palestine? But we know for a fact that the most successful people that Allah has chosen for this ummah in this day and age, in this period, are our brothers and sisters in Palestine and in Gaza specifically. Even if, the results that are being displayed in front of our eyes in the materialistic sense is death, genocide, famine, hunger. But in reality they're achieving success because success is determined by obeying Allah and following Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet ﷺ, however, this made him go grey. Not because for a second that he would have thought that this meant that the failure of these messages. No, not at all. It's because the Prophet ﷺ, one of the greatest characteristics that Allah Azza wa Jal has given him is what? He's rahmatul lil alameen. He is a mercy for all of the believers. And on the Day of Judgment, when all of the Anbiya, when people will be going to them, seeking their shafa'ah, their intercession with Allah Azza wa Jal, each and every single one of them would be turning people away from one reason or another and sending them to somebody else until they come to Isa alayhi salam, and Isa alayhi salam sends them to the Prophet of Allah, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he will be the one who does shafa'ah for every single person who believed. This is our Prophet ﷺ. So when he hears these stories over and over and over again of people being destroyed, what happens to his heart? He sees his own ummah. He sees his companions. He sees his brothers who will come after him, us whom he has not seen. And he has love and he has fear in his heart for what might happen to us right here as we are sitting right now. He makes dua for us. And when he reads this and he reads all the stories of these people being destroyed over and over and over again because they did not heed the command of their prophets, this puts fear, this puts sadness and sorrow into the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. And this puts fear in him for what might happen to us as an ummah. It would behoove us as believers to turn back and reflect on this. Reflect on these nations, those that came before, and to take lessons from their lives. Why? So that we don't end up as examples like them. They were made examples for us. We should not be made examples for those who come after. And Allah will preserve this religion. Islam will stay. Islam will not go anywhere. But there is no guarantee that we will be preserved. Our preservation depends on our relationship with the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. With what we do with these stories that we hear. Do we implement them into our own lives? Or do we ignore them? Do we turn away from the Quran such that we end up as examples for those that come after us? I just want to go over a few ayat from Surah Hud that are very important for us to reflect on, to ponder upon, and to take lessons from. And inshallah today I'll try not to take as long as I did 2 nights ago. The first thing that we have, Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions the story of Nuh alayhi salam. And in the story of Nuh alayhi salam, He mentions an important few ayat. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنَّا رَحْمَةً ثُمَّ نَزَعْنَاهَا مِنْهُ إِنَّهُ لَيَئُوسٌ كَفُورٌ. When we make human beings taste some mercy from us, and then we take that away from them, then such a person turns away in despair. He turns away rejecting the blessings that we had given him in the first place, almost as if he doesn't even recognize that he had anything to begin with. وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَاهُ نَعْمَاءَ بَعْدَ ضَرَّاءَ مَسَّتْهُ لَيَقُولَنَّ ذَهَبَ السَّيِّئَاتُ عَنِّي. And if we were to make him taste blessings after putting him in tests and trials that, touched him, that he dealt with, he would say, all of these trials, they have gone away from me. إِنَّهُ لَفَرِحٌ فَخُورٌ. And he would turn very happy, but in a pompous way, in an arrogant way. He would think he has escaped himself. He has done something to be able to get away from these tests and trials. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ كَبِيرٌ. Except for those who have patience and those who perform righteous deeds, they are those who have attained mercy, forgiveness from Allah, and they have a great reward. Sometimes in life, what happens? When you're young, Allah has given you health. And when you get older, some aspects of this health might be taken away from you, right? Maybe you're diagnosed, subhanAllah, just yesterday I heard a little girl, 9 years old. She was playing with her friends in the school playground, and she just fainted. And they took her to the hospital, and the doctors, they didn't really care much. They said, this happened, something must have happened. She might have been dehydrated or whatever. They sent her back home. A few weeks go by, and this happens one more time. And now the parents are really, really worried. They take her back to the hospital, and the doctors, they force them. The doctors don't want to do anything. They force the doctors, do an MRI, do a proper scan, check and make sure everything, cross all the boxes. They do this test, they do the scan on her. They find there's a small tumor growing in the middle of her brain. And you know what? It's cancerous, it's malignant, it's growing. And it's in such a place in her brain that it can't be operated. They don't have the technology yet to operate in that part of the brain without risking near death for the child. So now she's undergoing chemotherapy. She's going through what's necessary, and may Allah grant her complete recovery. Doctor said there's nothing short of a miracle that can make this better. But subhanAllah, we go throughout our lives and we don't reflect on what Allah has given us until that's snatched away from you. Until that is snatched away from you. Whether it's your health, whether it's your job, whether it's your relationship, whatever it might be, you don't recognize its value. We don't turn back in shukr. We don't show gratitude to Allah for every single thing that He has given us right now. Each and every single one of us sitting in this room right now, when we are praying salah, when we're listening to this, what's going through most of our minds, including myself? What's going through our minds is the difficulties that we have to face. Next week I'm doing this, but this hasn't been confirmed. This might be a problem. How do I deal with it? I have to make phone calls. I have to get an answer. I have to deal with. This is what's going on in my mind right now. What's going to happen a week from now, a month from now, in that appointment, in that thing. It's only these problems that take up the space in our minds, but we never turn back to Allah Azza wa Jalla. We never think Allah has, I had these problems last week. Allah took care of these problems for me. Whatever it might have been. And for a fact, the problems we went through last week or last month or last year, they're not the same problems we're dealing with now. In most cases. We don't reflect that Allah took us through these tests and these trials, and He allowed us to surpass them. And He granted us mercy and rahmah. So when we face these tests and trials, if we face it knowing that Allah Azza wa Jalla is taking us through these tests and trials, you know what we have? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. We have patience. We're able to bear it. But when we don't remember Allah Azza wa Jalla and we don't do shukr of Him for all of the blessings that He has given us, every single time we are faced with a test and trial, it's as if the world is over. إِنَّهُ لَيَئُوسٌ كَفُورٌ. A person turns feeling despair, like there's nothing that can help you. You think about it. Think about all of the mental health issues that we face in a society today that deal specifically with depression. Where does it come from? If you want to say it's chemical imbalances in the brain, there are studies now that show that that's not the case, or at least that's not the primary case. This is connected to our ruh, our nafs. This is connected to our soul. This is connected to our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. You might feel sadness, you might feel sorrow, that's fine, that's part of life. But if we have a strong relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, a relationship built on shukr for what He has given us, and sabr for the tests and trials that we are facing, then it doesn't matter what it is that's in front of us. We'll be able to surpass and we'll be able to overcome it. But our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal is weak. And we have to reflect on that. And when we're standing and we're praying to Allah Azza wa Jal, how are we praying to Him? Is the only thing that is fogging our minds while we are doing sajda and ruku' are those difficulties that we're facing? Or are we reflecting to Allah for all of the blessings that He has given us? Primarily being able to be in the house of Allah while so many people struggle. You'll see sometimes people, they aren't able to walk, they're on wheelchairs, they're not even able to come to the musalla that easily. And yet they're struggling, and Allah has given them tawfiq to be able to do so. How much are we reflecting on what Allah has given us? And what are we doing? How are we showing that shukr for what Allah has given us? Where are we utilizing our health, our free time, our family, our wealth? Where's our money going? Allah Azza wa Jal, He then mentions a few ayat afterwards. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, أم يقولون افتراه قل فأتوا بعشر سور مثله مفتريات وادعوا من استطعتم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين فإن لم يستجيبوا لكم فاعلموا أنما أنزل بعلم الله وأن لا إله إلا هو فهل أنتم مسلمون. Allah Azza wa Jal here, He's speaking then, when a person is in a state of despair, when a person is in a state of loss, what takes them through all of this? The Book of Allah, this guide that He has given us, this source of healing for everything that we're going through. Then Allah Azza wa Jal, He describes the Quran, and He says, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَاهُ. Do they say that this is fabricated? قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُورٍ مِثْلِهِ. Then come with 10 surahs, the likes thereof, مُفْتَرَيَاتٍ, as they claim. وَدُعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And call everybody that you can, other than Allah Azza wa Jal, to be able to come and produce this. And if you're not able to respond to this call, if you're not able to respond to this challenge, then know أَنَّمَا أُنزِلَ بِعِلْمِ اللَّهِ. Then this is revealed with the knowledge of Allah, وَأَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ. And that there is no creator, there is no God, there is no deity except for Allah. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Do you then submit? One of the greatest miracles of the Quran is the fact that it cannot be replicated. The fact that this is not the word of any human beings. This is one of the greatest miracles of the Quran. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal challenges the people throughout with this miracle of the Quran. The fact that it cannot be replicated. The fact that it cannot be reproduced. But you know what's really sad in all of this? That this, one of the greatest miracles of the Quran, is something that most of us, including me, we're not able to feel this within our own hearts, within our own minds. The greatest miracle of the Quran, its language, its perfection in eloquence, its perfection in speech. This is something most of us have not been able to taste for ourselves because we don't have that relationship with the Book of Allah. Whether we don't have that language that allows us to understand the Book of Allah, or whether we have that language but we don't utilize our time properly in reflecting and pondering upon these words that are mentioned in the Book of Allah. When in fact this is one of the greatest miracles of the Quran. And being that it is one of the greatest miracles in the Quran or of the Quran, it is also one of the greatest, most sure paths that would lead a person to true iman and submission. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. When you know, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He's speaking to these Arabs who are at the peak of eloquence and brilliance in language. He's telling them, when you realize that you're not able to produce something like this, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, are you then going to submit? Meaning what? Meaning when you realize the perfection and the beauty of the Quran, its perfect eloquence and elegance, that's when you humble yourself. And you realize that, by Allah, this is from nobody except the Almighty. This cannot be produced from any human beings. But this is just a claim that we assert over because we've been told this, because we've inherited this, but we haven't tasted this for ourselves. And what's important is for us to actually taste the reality of this miracle. And it's something that each and every single one of us were able to do. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Allah has made this easy. Every aspect of the Quran, memorization, understanding, reading, if we put in the effort, Allah Azza wa Jal will make it easy for us. There's no excuse for us. Allah has commanded. Allah has noted in the Quran that this is easy. And when you speak to the US military, they have the system that they made of languages. Say they qualify which languages. If English is your first language, then there are these levels, and every language is placed in one of these 4 or 5 levels of difficulty. And Arabic usually is at that highest level of difficulty, along with Mandarin. I believe it's just 2 or 3 languages. Arabic is one of them. But subhanAllah, ask any madrasa student down the street, or any auntie, or anybody who has just spent time learning the Arabic language for the sake of Allah, for a few weeks, for a few months. Ask them how fulfilling it is. Ask them how amazing they feel. Ask them how easy it is because of the sincerity of purpose that they have. Whereas at the same time, those other people, they spend their whole lives, they do tours in all of these countries over and over again. They do their PhDs and they study Islam throughout. They struggle with the Arabic language. I've met people like that. If we try to learn the Book of Allah in order to be able to understand this miracle and to communicate with the Almighty, then wallahi, this is an easy task. This is not difficult, not for anyone, not for old, young, male, female, none. Because Allah has made this easy. It might take time. This might be a test from Allah for you. Are you sincere? You have to prove it. It's not like it's going to unlock overnight. Maybe for some people, but for most of us, it'll take time, but that time will be worth it. Allah has made it easy. Allah Azza wa Jal, then He's speaking more about the story of Nuh alayhi salam. Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions the story of the ship. حتى إذا جاء أمرنا وفارت النور قلنا احمل فيها من كل زوجين اثنين وأهلك إلا من سبق عليه القول ومن آمن وما آمن معه إلا قليل وقال اركبوا فيها بسم الله مجريها ومرساها إن ربي لغفور رحيم وهي تجري بهم في موج كالجبال ونادى نوح ابنه وكان في معزل يا بني اركب معنا ولا تكن مع الكافرين قال سآوي إلى جبل يعصمني من الماء قال لا عاصم اليوم من أمر الله إلا من رحم وحال بينهما الموج فكان من المغرقين. Allah Azza wa Jal, He's describing the story of Nuh alayhi salam and his son. Nuh alayhi salam, he's given da'wah to his people for over 950 years. And only a few people accept. Then Nuh alayhi salam, he's commanded to build the ark. And only these few people come in. There's more animals and creatures and bugs and insects, all of these things that have climbed on board. His own family his wife and his son have refused to climb on board. Refused to climb on board. And you can look at the emotion in which he's saying, he's speaking. وَنَادَى نُوحٌ ابْنَهُ. Nuh is nada ibnahu. You know the word nida. He's not saying to his son. He's not commanding his son. Nada Nuhun ibnahu. He's calling out, he's yelling in desperation to his son. وَكَانَ فِي مَعَزِلٍ يَا بُنَيَّ ارْكَبْ مَعَنَا. This is an interesting thing that happens in tajweed. I don't want to go into the details, but it's almost as if you swallow up a letter. يَا بُنَيَّ ارْكَبْ مَعَنَا becomes يَا بُنَيَّ ارْكَبْ مَعَنَا. Imagine yourself, the waves are around you. You're seeing your son walk away. He doesn't trust you. He doesn't want to be with you. He doesn't trust that the ship will last. He wants to go to a mountain. He feels like that's where he'll be saved. That's where the rest of the people are going. You're calling him, come to the ship. Get on. What are you doing? There's no time. You're going to drown. And as he's speaking, as he's yelling to him in desperation, asking him to come, he's swallowing up his words. He's not able to even properly speak. Imagine the tears that are flowing down his eyes as he's seeing his son walk away. Many of us are young, we don't know this, we don't have sons. But those of us who do, imagine that. Imagine losing your son in front of your eyes. Not only is this the loss of this life, which is difficult enough already, you know this person is going to drown in this life and have an eternity of hellfire ahead. And you're yelling in desperation, just come board the ship. We'll talk about it later, whatever, just get on the ship, just trust me. And he doesn't. He turns away and he leaves. And he drowns. And he dies. And he will be resurrected. And he will be thrown into hellfire. You know what Nuh alayhi salam, he says? ونادى نوح ربه فقال رب إن ابني من أهلي وإن وعدك الحق وأنت أحكم الحاكمين. Then he turns to Allah Azza wa Jal. Does he just say something? No. ونادى, once again, he's yelling out in dua to Allah Azza wa Jal. He's saying to Allah Azza wa Jal, ونادى نوح ربه فقال. He's saying now in this dua that he's making, after he has cried out and turned to Allah Azza wa Jal, he's saying, Rabbi, my Lord, inna ibni min ahli. My son is from my family. Wa inna wa'adaka al-haq, and you promised that you would save my family, and your promise is true. Wa anta ahkamul hakimin, and you're the most just, you're the most wise. So how is it that he's not with me? How is it that he has not been saved? How is it that he has not been protected? Allah Azza wa Jal responds to him, قَالَ يَا نُوحُ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ. Nuh, he's not from your family. He's not from your family. إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. Indeed, he was not righteous. Your family are the righteous. فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Do not ask me about that which you have no knowledge of. إِنِّي أَعِذُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I warn you to not be from those who are ignorant. قَالَ رَبِّي إِنِّي أَعُوذُ بِكَ أَنْ أَسْأَلَكَ مَا لَيْسَ لِي بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Ya Allah, I seek your refuge. Nuh alayhi salam, he's responding, Ya Allah, I seek your refuge in asking you that which I have no knowledge of. وَإِلَّا تَغْفِرْ لِي. And if you do not forgive me, وَتَرْحَمْنِي, and have mercy on me, أَكُمْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. I will be of those who have lost. إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. Nobody here will say that Nuh alayhi salam failed as a father. Not a single. If you want to say Nuh alayhi salam failed as a father, you've committed kufr by insulting one of the anbiya of Allah. He did not fail as a father. His son failed as a son. His son failed to be one of his family members the moment he turned away from Allah Azza wa Jal. There's an important reminder here. Our wala and our bara, our love and our hate is for the sake of Allah and for the sake of Allah alone. Even if it is our own flesh and our own blood. At the end of the day, we stand with whom we stand for the sake of Allah. And we stand against whom we stand against for the sake of Allah. Even if the person does not share my skin color, does not share my language, does not share the same continent from which I am, if he professes La ilaha illallah, فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ, then he is from my family. But if my own flesh and blood turns away and rejects the da'wah that I am giving him, the Quran that I am trying to hand down to him, the message of Allah, if he turns away from Islam, then he is not from me. My responsibility and my duty to him is like my duty to anybody who is not a Muslim. I show them kindness, I show them mercy, and I do all of this so that I can invite them to the path of Allah, so that they can then truly be from my family. Many of us, we come here and we carry our culture along with us. And there's nothing wrong with that until it gets to the point where our culture overrides our iman, overrides our deen. And in that situation, your culture is poison. Your culture is a path to hellfire. Your culture, your baggage is something you need to drop. The moment that it calls to question your deen, your relationship with Allah, and your relationship with the people around you for the sake of Allah. I mentioned this in theory, but there are very practical, lived examples of this that we have to reflect on. Because for each and every single one of us, there comes times where our cultures get in the way of our practice of our deen. And when that happens, we are, as Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, إِنِّي أَعِذُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. Allah warns us not to be from those who are amongst the ignorant and those who lack knowledge. Our culture will not save us. Our deen will save us. Then Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions the story of Hud He mentions the story of Hud after the story of Nuh alayhi salam, and after the story of Nuh alayhi salam, he mentions the story of Hud. After the story of Hud alayhi salam, he mentions the story of Salih alayhi salam, and in the story of Salih alayhi salam, he mentions there's something beautiful and powerful. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, قالوا, the people of Salih, they said, يا صالح قد كنت فينا مرجوا قبل هذا أتنهانا أن نعبد ما يعبد آباؤنا وإننا لفي شك مما تدعونا إليه مريب. He says, Salih's people, they said, Ya Salih, you used to be somebody who had a lot of potential. We used to see a lot of goodness within you before this, before you started calling us to this. Are you going to prevent us from what our forefathers used to worship? Has it ever happened, if you're practicing in your family, that other people in your family who are perhaps not as practicing, they start saying, what happened to him? He comes from such a good family, he had such a good education, we had such bright hopes for him. We expected so much for him, but look at him now, he's wasting away all his potential. What is he doing in the masjid so much? What is he doing with those friends, with those extremists? Why is he growing out a beard now? Making it difficult for him to get a job. Why is she putting on a hijab now? Why is she putting on a niqab now? I heard people in this community who might outwardly be involved in religious circles, you know what they do? When their daughter decides to put on a niqab, you know what they do? They take their daughters home, they beat their daughters, they grab the niqab off of their faces and they want to burn that niqab. What are you going to answer to Allah Azza wa Jal? Where are you going to end up? It's expected. You know, we have people that come in through the doors every single day, today, accepting Islam, saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and then, you know, perhaps expressing to us that their families are not that accepting. Of course their families would not be, they would be accepting of that. They don't know any better. They have that excuse. They believe about Islam what the media tells them about Islam. They don't show the love. They don't know the love, the mercy, the khair, the goodness. They don't know these high moralities that we have. They don't know the virtues that we express. So khalas, if they're scared, it makes sense. Take time with them. Have mercy on them. Speak to them. Explain to them slowly. Have wisdom in how you deal with them. But you grew up as a Muslim. You grew up around religious people. You grew up around ulama, and yet you're scared your son is growing a beard. You fear he's losing his potential. He wants to go study Deen and Islam and not study medicine or engineering. Do you feel that he's losing his potential, or is Allah Azza wa Jal blessing him such that that potential, everything which is still within him, is now being used for a better cause, a better purpose? To serve the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, to serve his family, to serve those that come afterwards in a way that is pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal. Again, something for us to question and reflect on. For our own children, many of us again here are parents. Do you want to be raised up on the day of judgment alongside these people from the family of Salih who said to him that he had great potential, that he was now wasting away because of calling people to the deen of Allah? We pray that Allah protects us from such a fate. Finally, Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions the story of Lut alayhi salam. And I'll end with this. The story of Lut alayhi salam. Lut alayhi salam speaks to them about the problems that they have. He speaks to them about the problems of homosexuality. He speaks to them about the evils of this sin and how it would lead to their destruction in this life and the next. And yet they turn away. They attack him, they attack the angels that have come. Allah Azza wa Jal commands them to leave. They leave, and these people are destroyed. You know, there's an important lesson here. Allah Azza wa Jal, He sends the people, He sends the messengers, the prophets, speaking to their people about the problems that they have, not about other problems. And this is something very important for us to remember right now. We live in a society that has specific problems. In fact, today the world has all the problems that you can imagine. But there are problems specific to our society. If I sit here and I speak to you of the problems of India or Bangladesh or Saudi or wherever, at the cost of addressing the problems that we face here in Whitechapel, in Tower Hamlets, in London, in England, then I've betrayed you. I've lied to you. I've wasted your time. I've misguided you. Allah Azza wa Jal, He sent the prophets to speak to their people about their problems. Each and every single one of the prophets spoke about Tawheed, because this was a problem that underlied every single nation that went astray and continues to do so today. So we always highlight our Aqeedah, we always highlight Tawheed. After that, we highlight the problems of our society, because Allah does not guide those who are fasiqeen. So unless we ask them to leave their fisq, their corruption that they struggle with, they will not be blessed with that guidance. So we ask them to remove themselves from that. Shu'aib alayhi salam, he was sent to his people to address the problems of financial transactions, cheating one another. Lut alayhi salam, he was sent to his people to speak to them about the grave sin of homosexuality. If Lut alayhi salam spoke about financial problems, and if Shu'aib alayhi salam spoke about homosexuality, they wouldn't have fulfilled the task with which Allah sent them. And this is very important, again, for us to remember now. Many of the Salaf, they used to mention this. They used to mention that if a person has a problem with riba, for example, and you go and you talk to them about sexual improprieties, then you have betrayed them. You've betrayed your people. Our da'wah needs to be tailored to the needs of our people. Who's our people? Once again, it starts with the believers that are around us. It starts with our families. It starts with our societies and the communities which we inhabit, our co-workers, our colleagues, our classmates. What are the problems that are persistent there? In the environments in which we find ourselves. Is it gossiping? I need to be reminding the people I'm with that we shouldn't partake in speaking bad about others that are not present. Will not help me if I'm talking to them about the problems of oppression in, some other part of the earth. If I'm not talking about the oppression that is going on right then and right there against that person who is not present in our gathering, at our own hands. This is Islah. This is the difference between being just a righteous person and being a person who brings about righteousness around you, being a rectifier. That we speak to the needs of our people in the right way at the right time. I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal allows us to be, proper du'at, who allows us to bring others to His deen, to His religion, to His way of life in the best manner possible. And I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal accept from us the most pressing need that we have right now. Of course, not forgetting our brothers and sisters in Palestine, to support them as we can, but also to utilize the time that we have in this month and make sure that we are turning back to Allah Azza wa Jal and we are becoming the best versions of Muslims that we can be, such that we can be useful for everyone else around us and for all of the other Muslims globally as well, and for the deen of Allah, in being able to do its khidmah and being able to be da'is to Allah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا جزاكم الله خيرا.